Hello, welcome to my channel. I received a question from a subscriber recently asking to show how I repot an African violet that grows using wick watering method. I speak about the wick watering method in a separate video and I will include a link to it in the description box. So starting today, here will be wild Irish rose. This is a standard variety that has been growing on a wick, and it has been growing in the same pot for over a year now, and I'm ashamed to say that because ideally they need to be repotted every 6 months. And also helping us today is a special guest, Bold Potty Girl. It's a very young standard, a hybrid by Paul Serrano and Linden Lion greenhouses, and it just started blooming. I missed showing it in the previous episode of the monthly blooms, so I decided to include it today. When plants are grown on wicks, usually the wick is inside of the pot, and then it goes down into the wicking liquid, into the reservoir that contains the liquid. And sometimes as the plant continues to grow, the roots come out through the drainage holes in the pot into the wicking liquid. And here we have just little roots coming out because this plant was recently repotted in February of this year. When the plant grows for a long time in the same pot, the roots continue to grow. And so here what happened is this plant has not been repotted for a year, so we have a lot of roots that were coming into the wicking liquid. So the first step in a case like this is to empty out the remaining wicking liquid and have the roots and the potting mix dry up a little bit, so it's easier to release the potting mix and the plant out of the pot. Next step is to decide on the size of the pot in which we will be potting the plant. This was grown in a 3-inch plastic pot, and now because it has grown up quite large and it's a standard variety, so we will be increasing the pot size up 1 inch and potting it up into a 4-inch pot. And it's important also that the pot is not too tall, so the diameter is 4-inch and the height of the pot is 3-inch. Next we will prepare also a reservoir for wicking, and I use just regular plastic cups for this, and I will show you the packaging. I get mine at a supermarket and they look just like this. They are 18-ounce plastic cups. For wicks, I use regular 4-ply acrylic yarn that I pre-soak ahead of time in hot water with some dish soap, and then I rinse them up with clean water. So now it's moist and it's ready for the wicking liquid to start working when inserted into the potting mix and the plant is all potted up. The way I insert the wicks into the pots, I used to do it first just one end, and I used to just insert it into a drainage hole and then hold it like this and then put some potting mix inside and then form like a little half ring on top of it. Now I've simplified the method quite a bit and I just insert it into the opposite side, and so all I have of the wick inside of the pot is this much. Sometimes I can lay it like this to increase the surface of the wick inside of the pot, but most of the times I position the wicks this way. For wicking liquid, I first use regular water, and for subsequent waterings, when adding the wicking liquid into the reservoir, I add Jack's Classic 1/8 teaspoon per gallon of water, and Jack's Classic has 20-20-20 NPK ratio. And sometimes I use Orchid Plus at 20-14-13 NPK ratio and the same amount, 1/8 teaspoon per gallon of water. Next, I put some fresh potting mix on the bottom of the pot. And sometimes if you are concerned with the potting mix going through the drainage holes, and this pot in particular has larger drainage holes, so some of it may go down into the liquid, and that's okay. And so some growers add paper towels on bottom inside, and that works as well. In my case, I just like keeping it simple. So sometimes you see pieces of wood in the potting mix, and it's okay, you just remove them. So this should be enough. I have a separate video describing the potting mix that I use, and I will include a link to it in the description box here. The main two ingredients are peat moss and coarse perlite at the ratio of 50-50. Now let's release the plant out of the old pot and get rid of as much of the old potting mix as possible. And so here you see only one end of the wick was going into the wicking liquid, and the other end of the wick was going all the way up. So as we release the wick, we also damage some of the roots that we may have otherwise saved if the wick was going only here on the bottom. So that's the other reason why I have switched the wick positioning method to guiding the wick through the bottom of the pot. So now we will tease the potting mix around the roots gently and try not to damage the root ball. And as I'm doing it, I'm realizing another important step that we should have done prior to this procedure. And guess what I should have done and completely forgot to do is removing all the blooms. And why we need to remove the blooms is because the blooms need a lot of energy, and when the plant blooms, it focuses its energy on producing the blooms. So we will remove all of the blooms and then carry on. And as I'm removing the blooms, I'm also seeing that this particular plant has quite a few suckers. And I will include a prompt to the sucker removal video here and in the description box. But I will also show you how I remove suckers from the plant before repotting. So now it's bloom free. The next step will be to remove the bottom leaves, the old leaves that have all sorts of water damage and sunburn damage. So we will just remove them and make sure we are not leaving any parts of the leaf at the stem, because they can start rotting, and we don't need any rotting action going on in the newly repotted plant. And so when we remove the old leaves, the plant will then focus on growing the new and fresh leaves instead. So as you see, we're removing quite a bit of the old leaves. And here we got to the sucker part, so I will be using an X-Acto knife to remove the suckers. And we will be doing it gently so we don't hurt the main stem of the plant, of the parent plant. So this is a large sucker and it can be rooted, and it will be its own separate plant. In the sucker removal video, I show how I root suckers. This is a small one, so we'll just discard off of it. Here is another big sucker. So I'll just use an X-Acto knife again to release it from the main stem. And voila! That's going to be another new plant. Alright, so we're almost done. And now it's just a matter of us seeing that the remaining rosette is symmetrical. And also I see a tiny little sucker inside in here. So this one we can just remove using our hand, our fingers. Just make sure that the center gets removed with this little tiny central leaf. And if there are any buds, like flower buds, also remove. Make sure there are no flower buds left here, because we want the plant focus on adjusting the root system first and then growing the new leaves from the center. So I think I will remove this leaf here and this one here. And that's it. Now we have a beautiful symmetrical rosette, and the roots, let's check one more time. I think all of the old potting mix has been removed and released. Sometimes there is like a hard root ball at the very end, so make sure that when we can tease it up a little bit to release the roots, because the wick watered plant have a tendency of forming like a tight root ball, especially if the perlite is smaller fraction. That's why it's important to use coarse perlite so that the potting mix gets released easier during repotting. Alright, so now we're all ready to pot it up into the new pot. And make sure that there's enough space here. And as I'm doing it, I think 4-inch pot is quite a large size for this. So instead of a 4-inch, I will go and get a 3.5-inch. So we will increase the size of the pot, but only by 1/2 inch. I have different 3.5-inch pots here, and this one is a soft plastic pot that is a little taller than this one. I will include a link to this pot. I got it on Amazon, and this one I got in a dollar store. This one is much better because it's shorter pot, so it should be better for the root system, because African violets, they prefer shallower pots. So I prepared the wick just like I did in the other pot, and we will use the same wicking reservoir. Just put it in there and make sure we will put the tape with the name of the variety and the repotting date to keep track on the repotting schedule. And now let's try and measure it to the pot. Yeah, so now it's much better. It's not as large as the other one was. And so again, we will put a little bit of potting mix on the bottom. And then put the plant in the center. And then start adding potting mix gradually around the stem of the plant. And make sure we don't pack the potting mix. The potting mix needs to be airy, light, so that the roots can grow freely through the mix. And why it's important to have sufficient amount of perlite in the mix is that perlite helps create air pockets in the potting mix, because the roots need to breathe and they need to have access to oxygen. All right, so that's pretty much it. So as you see, I don't pack it, I just tap it slightly on the pot so that the potting mix is distributed evenly. And then I water the potting mix to start the wicking liquid going, because our wick has already been pre-moistened. I've never filmed a video, a repotting video on the plant stand shelf, so bear with me. I hope you can see what I'm doing. And if you see that there is still some stem that is not covered with the potting mix, then we can add some more to make sure that all the bare stem is covered, but also make sure that we don't get the potting mix inside of the crown center, because that's a no-no, because otherwise the central leaves will not be able to grow. All right, so that's it. The center is nice and clean. The plant is all potted up and ready to go on the shelf. When wick watering, it's important to ensure that the surface of the wicking liquid does not touch the bottom of the pot, so that some of the wick is still exposed to the air inside of the wicking reservoir, because we don't want to have the potting mix oversaturate with the wicking liquid. Now let's pot up the suckers. I'll use the 3-ounce plastic cups, and I put the electric tape with the name of the variety and today's date. And I use the same potting mix with 50% perlite and 50% peat moss. So I'll just make an indentation using this makeup brush, the other side of it, and put the sucker in so that the center of the sucker is not covered with the potting mix. I'll water very gently around the edge of the pot, and then cover it either using a plastic bag, or I can put it in the domed propagation trays that I showed in the propagation trays video. It's in the African Violet Care playlist if you want to check it out. And then I just zip it up. This is the second sucker, and we will water it gently, and this one will go into a dessert cup here. They have lids and they're very good for keeping the moisture in. So it's like a mini propagation container just for one sucker. And so we have an adult plant of wild Irish rose repotted on a wick, and we also have 2 baby suckers potted up for rooting.